Alright, my darlings. Well, you knew this was coming, so let's not waste time and get straight into it.
Wait, I have to make some reference to how I was involved in this story despite how you never see me.
All in good time, Huck. Much like the last series, this series was based off of multiple books within the franchise, In the Path of the Storm and Battle for the Park. Though those more familiar with the book series may notice there's one missing here, The Siege of White Deer Park. Some of the writers of the series have gone on record and stated that the reason why this particular book was skipped was because it was too dark and gory. Which, given the stuff that they've shown in the previous two series, what the hell was in this book that was too dark to be in the TV series?
Believe me, I know what it was like. I've seen things.
Oh great, more flashbacks. Well, let's get back to the history while he's circling the airport. Me personally, I think the real reason it was skipped was because it had a lot of elements about it that feel like they couldn't really be mixed with the other stories. The three books that were used in the previous series all came out successively one after the other, and it did feel very close together in terms of when it took place. Siege seems to take place within its own particular year, and then the following books seem to take place at least a year or two after that event. For example, there's a new character in the series called Plucky. In the books, he's meant to be Fox's great-grandson, and we are introduced to his grandson in Siege. So this would mean that Fox has heralded 3 new generations before he passed away. That, and if I'm being honest, the story wasn't really all that great. It had great build-up, but it really had a bad ending. So that's my theory on why it was skipped. But regardless of that, this is a story where they're adapting multiple books into one series, including a very large one that was invented solely for the show. We'll get into that eventually. So once again, it was definitely an ambitious production, though this time there were other problems to contend with. See, it seems that the dark and, well, let's be frank, traumatic elements of the previous two series eventually caught up with them, as this series was clearly made to be more kid-friendly compared to the previous two. We'll get into the specifics later, but this is very evident from the first episode, with the animation looking distinctly different. There are many characters who don't return at all in this series, including Kestrel, which really sucks because I really liked her, but the most significant change being the distinct lack of death and gore in this series. As well as that, it was clear to the production crew that this was going to be the last series, as the prequel book to Farthing Wood had not yet been written, so they had no more material to go back to in order to make a following series. As such, they were laying the seeds for a potential spin-off of the series, which more or less led to probably the worst aspect of the entire show that we have ever seen. But enough beating around the bush, let's get into the first episode, or as I like to call it, laying the foundation for subplots. No, seriously, this whole episode is just setting up the basis for various plot arcs that go throughout the series. There's pretty much no character moments besides one of the early scenes of the series where we see 2 of the new characters, the aforementioned Plucky and Hare's granddaughter Dash, having a race. And I will admit that they are one of the highlights of this series. They are very endearing characters and their friendship is very genuine.
Lovely morning for a race, Dashy.
Not again. I always win.
I know you always win, but I feel extra special fast today.
Though I'm sure that's led to many pieces of fan art that I do not want to see.
A hare and a fox being friends? It's unnatural, I tells ya,
says the fox who speaks with the voice of Bart Simpson. Also, welcome back. This is also a good moment to talk about the animation. As you can see, it's got the same sort of backgrounds we got the last time, as well as the colour scheme. However, the character models, and especially the motions and use of expressions, are much more cartoony and detailed to the previous series. The eyes are much more detailed compared to the dot eyes they had in the previous series. The faces have a lot more structure to them, and they are way more anthropomorphic than they ever were before. This is especially evident in the new characters, in particular the new villains, Bully and his rats, which we'll get into in a bit. This was one of the things that was the most complained about with the series, and how it was so different to the previous one visually. But personally, I quite like it.
And prepare for fan backlash in 3, 2, 1.
It's not as good as the animation of the previous series in terms of style and grace, I'll grant you that. But it is nice to see these characters given more life and energy to them. And To be fair, they did dabble in this style a little bit in the previous series, in particular the episode Time of Reckoning, so they did at least ease into it a little bit. Though, I will admit the fact that they did still refer back to the old character designs mixed in with the new ones, it does look really jarring. But in some cases it does work, like with the villains. Speaking of which, the first two major plot developments that happen in the series are the Great White Stag dies of accidentally drinking poison water, which is one of only 2 deaths in this series, and it's a pretty lame one at that.
Boy, son.
Where's the blood? I was expecting copious amounts of blood! This then leads to a power vacuum in the Stags, and the young upstart named Trey is gunning for the role of head stag. Unfortunately, he really hates all the other animals besides stags, in particular weasels, which might make you think that he's filling the role of Scarface, but no, he's less of a fascist dictator and more like a bitchy neighbour, with a voice that sounds like Malcolm McDowell doing the world's worst impression of Kevin Keegan.
If I hear you again, once, ever, I shall stamp on you. I don't like weasels.
I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
This then leads to Weasel leaving the park as she doesn't feel welcome anymore, coupled with some other new arrivals that are going to be coming soon. Oh yes, she's now pregnant.
Sorry, I think my brain just collapsed there. What did you say?
Weasel is pregnant.
There it goes again.
So she and Measley leave the park, but not before she gives Owl a stripping down by insulting her by how she's never had a mate.
That will mean more weasels. Twice the fuss and bother.
Insulting my little ones when they aren't even born yet!
I was merely saying.
You can say what you like, but you haven't got a mate, have you?
Which prompts her to leave as well in search of one. Those are the 2 major side plots in this series, much like how Bold's journey was the major side plot of the previous one. We'll get into them later, but first, let's take a look at the main plot. The main threat of the park, besides Trey, is a plague of rats that have arrived in the park and looking to make it their new home, and drive out all the other animals to have it for themselves. They are the major villains of this series, and if you were expecting them to be as dark and intimidating as the last series ones, think again.
What did we come here for? Eh, brat?
Here. What do we come... that's an easy one. We come to take over White Deer Park.
Right.
Oh yeah, these guys are far from the big cheese.
Boo.
These guys are clearly made to be more comedic relief bad guys. In fact, they remind me a lot of the bad guys from He-Man, especially with them living in a cave the shape of their leader's face. And they are rather annoying, tell the truth. That being said, I do enjoy Ron Moody's performance as the lead rat bully.
And now he's stone dead. So what's gonna stop us making it our patch from now on? And who's gonna stop us, eh?
He was another thing that was heavily criticised, mostly due to how in the books he was a more vicious and animalistic leader, but here he's more like a goofy gangster. But I do kinda like that. It gives him distinction from Scarface and gives him more of a personality. And Moody's voice is essentially his old Fagin voice from Oliver, just more deeper and cartoony, and it really works for me.
That's right. I want your report. All the relevant details. Come on.
I'm afraid these don't grow on trees. You got to pick a pocket or two.
Let's show them how to do it, my dear.
That being said, his catchphrase is really annoying.
Who am I?
Bully.
Bully. And don't you forget it.
He says this so much that I'm half convinced this is part of some kind of attention fetish that he has.
Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
Look who's talking.
Oh come on, you know you're as much of an attention whore as I am.
Yeah, but at least I look good being one.
My only other guess as to why they do this is to try and invoke a fascist dictatorship, like the Third Reich. But given where this show was made, they naturally didn't want to make it too obvious, so they did this instead, which is way more annoying. Also, as the series progresses, the sheer number of rats he has under his command is pretty impressive, and it does make them come across as a genuine threat. Of course, that is then dissipated when they do this.
Who am I?
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now that we've got the major plot arcs established, let's get into them. The main plot elements that happen in the park are the power struggle between the deer, some of the animals are seemingly disappearing, and the rat problem. And To be honest, the first two aren't all that interesting, nor do they play much relevance in the story until the very last episode, so I'll do a quick sum up of them now. Trey keeps getting into conflicts with the other animals, which leads to one of my favourite moments in this series when he has an argument with Friendly, mostly because Friendly for some reason has become a bit more bitchy and slightly swishier than he was in the last series.
I don't think we met since you became leader of the herd. Congratulations. And a good morning to you, too.
I'm starting to realize now why he never had any cubs of his own.
For the record, he said that, not me.
I'm a weasel?
I'm glad you admit it.
Does a weasel have a bushy tail like this one?
But eventually the struggle comes to a head with the deer fighting it out amongst themselves for the title, and while Trey does win at first, after a severe storm happens, he gets trapped under a trunk and is taken away to be healed, leaving the second in command, Laird, in charge.
I'll soon get them in line when I'm leader of the herd.
You'll never be.
Who I will admit is actually a pretty cool character, mostly because of his awesome Liam Neeson-esque voice.
Come on then, I'm ready for you. Do your best.
I have a very specific set of antlers. As for the animals disappearing, it turns out that the warden is moving a lot of them to another park away from White Deer Park, including Plucky, which does lead to a nice moment where he escapes and he and Dash meet back up again.
Plucky?
Hello, Dashy. I've missed you.
Yeah, I missed you too.
As for the rest, they basically set up this Great Escape style plot of Whistler carrying some of the animals back to the park, which sounds cool, but it's really not. All it is an excuse to hammer in Whistler's only character trait he has now, that being he can't land safely anymore.
Not since Marty McFly being mad at being called a chicken has a new character trait been introduced so smoothly.
Though I will admit, the way they set up Plucky's escape is legit hilarious.
I've tried to escape, but the walls are too high. My only chance is when the gates are open for the humans to pass through.
What an incredible coincidence.
Come on, they had to have timed that to be funny. So with those two plot arcs out of the way, let's get into the main bully one. This arc is responsible for introducing us to a few new characters, such as Ada's mate Sinuous, who has become a fan favourite, not the least of which due to what happens to him later, we'll get to that, but also for giving Ada some much needed character development, as well as his awesome Alan Rickman-like voice.
I'm sinuous.
So am I.
No, it's my name.
Fame isn't everything.
How very sexy. However, not all of the new characters introduced are as good as him. There's a new Badger, Hercule, who they had to introduce due to how Badger in the books never passed away like he did in the previous series, so they had to make a replacement role, which is fine, but why did they go for this character? A nasally, neurotic Badger who keeps trying to make friends with other people.
Don't worry. I'm your friend, yes.
So he's kind of like you in high school?
Shut up. This is also a good point to mention that Ron Moody is really overused in this series, and while his bully voice is good, most of the other new characters he voices are insanely annoying and obnoxious, and Hercule is one of them.
Who wouldn't be in a bad mood finding vermin in their byre?
I snore like a pig, but I am a pig. I may be wild, but I'm still piggy.
Also, Shadow from Bold Story in the last series comes back and becomes Hercule's mate, and while both she and Hercule don't really have much to contribute to the story, it is nice to hear her soothing Scottish accent again.
He's my mate, Hercule. And I'm Shadow. I knew Fox's son, Bold. He was one of you.
But let's get to the arc itself. It's funny how I said the rats remind me of Skeletor and his goons, because the way this arc progresses, it's very much like a Saturday morning cartoon, but in reverse, where instead of the villains coming up with schemes to defeat the good guys and failing, it's the heroes here that keep coming up with schemes to defeat the rats, and they fail. They do take out a few of their numbers along the way, but they easily keep coming back, and I suppose the deaths of the rats could count towards the death count, but they become so disposable in the series, it's like popping bubble wrap. You don't care how much of it you popped, you just care how much of it that's left. And I mean it, they try everything, getting the warden's attention to poison them, and also firing his shotgun into their den, attacking them in the open, Adder and Sinuous sneaking into his home to kill him, having the deer stampede over them. Nothing works. Forget whack-a-mole, this is whack-a-rat.
Sounds like a slang term for masturbation.
Easy there, Huck. We'll have plenty of time to get into that stuff in our next video. Speaking of which, about moles, not masturbation, Spike, Bully's number 2, is sent to spy amongst the Farthing Wood animals as an innocent rat who just wants to be friends, in order to get information. But what's interesting is that he ends up becoming genuine friends with Mossy and Toad, and even ends up fighting back against Bully to help save him from being eaten in a later episode.
What happened? I'm all confuserated.
And officially ends up joining the Farthing Wood gang. It's actually a pretty good character arc, and while it's mostly played for comic relief, like most of the stuff in this series, there is some genuine heart to it, and I love how it's these two who coaxed him over to their side, as they're the most innocent and friendly of the gang, and the friendship between Spike and Toad is really nice.
You're my best friend ever. I'm not frightened anymore. If it happens again, just you wait. I'll fight like a terrier.
And it's good, not just because Toad didn't really get to do much in the previous series, but it's also one of the few times where it feels like the old characters get their proper due. One of the issues with introducing so many new characters and having multiple side plots is that it stretches things very thin, and as such, many of the previous main characters feel like supporting roles now. And granted, that has always been a little bit of an issue with this show, but the previous series made it feel like every character was given the right amount of time dedicated to them. But here, it feels like we only have focus on Spike, Toad, and Bully as a matter of fact. Bully feels more like a main character than even Fox does, who spends most of the series sleeping and doing nothing. Granted, I get that he's meant to be old and tired at this point, but still, he's the main character. You can't just shove him aside and forget about him.
Why not? That's what I'm gonna do to you someday.
Wait, what? On the flip side, it is kinda cool to have a villain be the major focus of your story, and it is an interesting way of doing things compared to the last series, but when a lot of it is just boiling down to lame comic relief, it really makes it a slog to get through. Though trust me, this is a breeze compared to what we'll be doing later. The only other major plot development is that Bully and his gang find Sinuous sleeping in the grass, and their heavy decides to strangle him to get him out of the picture, which is one of the only times in this series it feels like it's getting close to the dark and gritty feel of the previous series. Even all that squeaking just makes it feel all the more disturbing.
Like an army of rubber ducks.
Okay, that is way less creepy. Or is it? This then leads to Ada becoming like a possessed demon, slaughtering as many rats as she can just to get revenge for her mate's death. And it is kind of cool to see Ada like this. In the previous series, she was very self-serving and really only did what she wanted to do. But now she is genuinely heartbroken and acting in a far more emotionally fueled way. And you really do feel for her.
They killed my Sinuous. And I'll kill all of them.
This all, of course, culminates up to the final episode, but before we take a look at that, let's take a look at the other major plot arcs. I'll be starting with Owl's first, since this is the one that I have the least to say about, and it's also the most tolerable. This arc mostly involves Owl trying to find a mate, which involves a few little excursions and failed attempts, and getting creeped over by a rook who is inexplicably in love with her.
Do you love me? Just a little bit.
Really?
I think you do.
I most certainly do not.
I would say I don't want to see fan art which is the result of this coupling, but I've already seen that. But she eventually finds herself in a small village which has an air of familiarity about it. And so it should, since it turns out, thanks to a random cat telling her, that it's where Farthing Wood used to be. Yep, this is what became of Farthing Wood after the giant cement mixers had their way with it. And it is kind of cool to see what actually happened to it, and we get to spend a decent amount of time there. And while the weird sexually confused rook does follow her there, Owl does also meet another owl called Hollow, who she naturally falls for, but he's not so interested himself, mostly due to feeling like she's too old and tatty for him, and that he's too handsome and intelligent for her.
So he's the reverse of Wayne Rooney?
Pretty much, yeah. By the way, did you happen to run into her on your journey?
No, but there were a few little shits that I wished I hadn't run into.
After this is established, the rest of the arc is mostly just a series of random events. Owl gets stuck in a house and the Rook tries to get her out, but has about as much success as any bird when it comes to facing their greatest nemesis, glass. His own mate shows up and reveals that she knows about his odd fetish but has accepted it and takes him home to heal up. Wow, now we've got an equivalent of Colleen Rooney. Al then accidentally flies into a cement mixer and gets trapped inside a hardened shell of concrete. This is when Hollow finally admits that he does have feelings for her, he was just too proud to admit it, and that he'll do anything to get her free.
But this tatty old owl, ruined inside cement, it is she that I love.
This would be sweet if it wasn't so bizarre. A storm then comes, which is cleverly addressed in all the various story arcs, and this is the same storm that Trey gets injured in, and this same storm then frees Al from her prison, and she and Hollow decide to go back to White Deer Park together, on the way passing the Rook, who reveals that he's not only the only Rook left in his tree, as all the others died in the storm, with the exception of a baby who he now has to take care of.
I must be mother and father to it. There's no one else. Do you understand?
Yes, of course.
This is such a weird plot turn that I'm not sure if I should feel sad or happy about it. And that's a good way to sum up this arc. It's very weird, and I'm not sure how to feel about most of it, but there are some good moments, and like I said, it is probably the best arc in Series 3, mostly due to Owl still being a great character, and we do get to see her go through more emotions that we normally see her in, which is good. However, we've now reached the point that I've been dreading, and I'm sure all of you have been waiting for. The Weasel Subplot.
This is the end, my only friend.
First off, I should explain about the origin of this subplot. All the plots I've looked over so far were from the books, but this was created as a completely new story arc for the show, the first and only time they ever did that. And the reason for doing so is really stupid, but also kind of genius. As I said before, the producers knew that they had run out of books to adapt, but they wanted to keep the series going because it was so popular. So they decided to use this story arc as a backdoor pilot to a spin-off involving the Weasels. And just the mere mention of that sentence makes my blood run tepid. However, as I said, it is a rather clever way that they did this as a way to try and keep the show going, even if doing it with the Weasels family wasn't the best idea. It would have been interesting to see how the story kept going. Sort of their own version of House of the Dragon, but given the way this arc turned out, I'm not surprised that it didn't happen. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Colin Dan deliberately stopped writing new books just to make sure that these characters would never be seen again. The whole plot of this arc is Weasel, Measley, and their new hellspawn that they call children, Fido and Cleo, who, while I will admit do have cute designs, are possibly the most annoying characters in this whole franchise, and that is quite an accomplishment. At this point, I'd welcome you hitting me on the head with that cricket bat, because then I'd lose consciousness and I won't have to listen to this crap.
But then who's left to knock me out?
And their journey is just to find a new home after leaving White Deer Park. And while the rat arc at the park was mostly just comic relief with very little drama, this is all relief and no drama. There is nothing about this arc that isn't supposed to be a joke, nor is there anything good about this arc, with the exception of the animation, which is probably the best in the series. Evidently, the animators were given more free rein to do what they wanted here.
Pity they didn't draw them being chopped up by a lawnmower.
I take it these were the ones that you ran into on your journey.
Oh, absolutely. Every time I tried to get some rest, or just get some peace and quiet, I heard the sound of what sounded like a mix between a frog's death rattle and Adam Sandler's cum noise.
Now there's a charming mental image for you. Most of this arc is just the Weasels meeting up with new characters and annoying them. I'll give them credit, that is what they're good at. Firstly, they're kicked out of Animal Farm, which given what happens there, they might have dodged a bullet. They then try to bunk with an old pompous ass.
Boris Johnson?
No, a donkey, who gets so annoyed by them that he destroys his own house. They then meet up with the only character in the series who is almost as annoying as them, Rollo.
Yes, I could play with your little ones.
Our very own dog!
thanks for reintroducing him. Now it's like annoyance cubed right now. And he ends up joining them on their journey to find a new home, which leads to one of the only bits that adapts anything from the siege, when they hunker down in the home of what turns out to belong to a wildcat.
But I'm not a cat. Not just a cat, I should say. I'm a wildcat.
Whose design bears a striking resemblance to the beast from that novel. What bad luck that they ended up in her home.
Oh, that wasn't luck. I chased her out knowing the weasels were nearby and hoped that she'd eviscerate them when she got back.
Didn't work though, did it?
No shit. I know I should have gone with the Acme dynamite rocket instead.
Rollo then fights off the cat, but ends up being separated from the weasels, who then find a runaway slaughter piglet, with probably the worst name ever in this series.
My name is... I'll never be sausages.
What a funny name!
And I thought Fox's kids' names were a bit on the nose.
Pig.
Weasel.
Pig. Weasel. Pig.
Weasel!
Donkey.
And then they run into a wild boar. After the storm, his sow, who we never actually see, dies, and he decides to adopt the piglet, which prompts Measley to finally grow a backbone and give us the only good moment in this whole arc.
Weasel? This time I won't have any arguments. I won't have any tantrums or name-calling. We're going back to White Deer Park. We're going home where our friends are. We will all be safe.
Yes, Measley. You're right.
Granted, it's probably just the music that sells that moment, but still, it is nice to see Measley stick up for himself for once. They then do return to the park, as well as Al, which finally culminates in the last episode of the show. After the whole train is reunited and a random, though pretty awesome dream sequence about a giant bully, it's finally time for the final battle. And it's a pretty awesome fight, but with the worst ending they could have possibly thought of. Now, in the book, Vixen kills Bully by crushing him in her jaws and symbolically spitting his body out over the park fence. A pretty awesome defeat. But of course, this series has its balls cut off, so this is how it ends.
Have you dropped something?
Dish that ear.
What?
Oh yes, you really did just see that.
Are you serious?
Arguably the biggest threat the Farthing Wood gang have ever faced, and he was defeated by one of the worst characters in the series biting his tail off.
This is the biggest anticlimax since...
No time for that now, Huck. We gotta wrap this video up.
Damn it!
Me personally, if you did have to change the ending from the book to make it less gory, I'd have Ada be the one who kills Bully by swallowing him whole. It's not gory, but it would give the sort of ending that felt satisfying. Plus, it would give Ada, the character who suffered the most in this series, her just revenge, as opposed to what actually happens, which is she disappears after the fight is over and we never see her again. This is probably the worst moment in the whole show, but to the show's credit, it's followed by one of the best moments, with Fox giving a speech about how he's grown too old to be the leader and hands over leadership to Plucky. As well as that, Trey returns, revealing that the other park that the animals were being taken to is a new expansion to the park to give all the animals more space and room. We then leave off on a wonderful and sentimental moment where Fox tells Plucky that he will carry the spirit of Farthing Wood with him, with a montage of moments from the series.
Plucky is my grandson. Through him, you have a direct link with the original spirit of Farthing Wood.
Repeat after me. I, name of animal.
Ending off on a beautiful sunset of the new park, ending the series, and the show as a whole.
We can explore our big new park tomorrow, and then we will plan how to live together in perfect peace and harmony, in the true spirit of Farthing Wood.
So, that was the third series of Farthing Wood. What do I think of it overall? Well, most of the bad stuff I got through in my recap. The story feels shallow and there's very little heart, drama or grit compared to the previous series. It's ungodly annoying, and now it barely feels like Farthing Wood anymore. But in a bizarre way, I actually do kind of like it.
I think you might have finally lost it.
Just hear me out. Yes, of all the series, it's by far the worst, but I don't think it's awful, it does have the feel of a show that knew it was coming to an end, so it went all out and did everything that they wanted to do. And while a lot of it didn't work, I do have to respect them for that. And the good moments that are in here, as few as they are legitimately good. Even the stuff that feels out of place but isn't bad, like the animation, is still nice to look at. It's sort of like the final series of Dragon Ball Z. It's not the best, but the stuff that's good in it is still really good. But it does get harder to watch each time, and I don't revisit it often. And so that was the end of the Farthing Wood TV series. And while the show ended, the same team would give us Noah's Island a few years later, which, granted, I've not rewatched since I was a kid, and I don't remember it being that great, but it was still nice to hear the old voice actors back doing their thing. As for the future of Farthing Wood, there's been no word on a reboot series or a remake, which I personally would love to see a modern retake on this story with some of the awkward bits taken out with modern technology, but only time will tell if we'll ever get it. And apparently this show gave me my mascot, in more ways than one. Speaking of which, what happened after your failed attempt to kill the weasels?
Well, I made my way to a nearby town, where I found something interesting.
Seems what they need is a water purifier.
Well, okay then. But I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye!
You've got to pick a pocket or two, boys. You've got to pick a pocket or two. Large amounts don't grow on trees. You've got to pick a pocket or two. Why should we break our backs, stupidly?